Now let me do some recap just in case some of you are connecting now or are eventually watching these online at a later moment. We have been discussing in the last hour and a half the results of a European funded project called Digi Training, under which or through which a group of institutions representing, all of them represented here now, have been providing capacity building capabilities to a number of museums across Europe. For it to be interesting for all of you, is the situation for the future. And in that, we're also joined by Geraldine Bueken, who has not been part of the Digi Training program, but who has a very solid expertise on that. So we'll also like to hear from you. The purpose of this conversation is to see how can we look forward, what is needed, what should museums be doing, because digitization is not a goal in itself. It's about reinventing museums, it's about rethinking who they are, it's about rethinking their mission. In fact, the very concept of museum as we know them is a kind of 300 years old. No? I don't know exactly which museum pretends to be the oldest museum in Europe. I know who pretends to be the oldest restaurant in Europe, for example. We know that. And there's even a film about that. Cabinets of Curiosities were the first museums as we know them, that we say. Okay, the Cabinet of Curiosities, but that was kind of more a circus thing. But anyway, so let's look into the future. And I would start, with Geraldine. Can I put you directly a question, and then you can divert? Because in a previous panel, we had a question that was kind of floating there, which is artificial intelligence and museums. So how will AI, artificial intelligence, affect this whole dimension of bringing digitization and the digital transition? What is your view on this?
Regarding the future of the museum, the first idea is the role of the visitor. Who is the visitor? Is an ambassador or just a viewer? So the idea of new technologies is to co-create new narrative with technologies. So I think the challenge is more to say, okay, we need to reinvent the past to nurture the vision for the future. And to go to this way, we have to challenge the audience and to make bridges between the digital natives generations and the museum collection. So for the IE, for example, the idea to say, okay, perhaps the museum will be like a place for a mood board of what people feel when they watch a painting, or perhaps the playlist they want to listen when they're in front of a great sculpture. So the idea is to make more interaction. I think it's one of the points, but the other point is to say the ecosystem, and I think also the business model have to rethink, because it's really expensive to go to the digital experience. So it isn't possible to keep the existing public funding. We need to give a place for private funding. And it opens new question to say all these new stakeholders can exchange with traditional cultural stakeholders.
Yeah, this brings us the word of exploitation. So exploitation of these, of course, the cultural transition requires private funding. Private funding means eventual private interest, and how do you balance that with the cultural mission that these museums have? It is not incompatible, but it needs to be managed. So Matias, I think you are in a very strong position. You represent Khora. Let's remind that to anybody who's viewing this. You represent a company, a private company. You're not a public institution. You've been involved in a public project, but you represent a private company from Denmark who has been serving museums and other cultural institutions as clients in their transition towards virtual and augmented reality. Now, how do you see this balance? You know, what is the future of exploitation of this content? How do you see this private-public dimension and your role there?
I think we should revert back to AI. What's the role of AI for culture and heritage in the future? And I think you have to imagine YouTube. What makes YouTube appealing and relevant, and how does it work? It works by recommendations, right? So you have AI algorithms, machine learning algorithms that recommends new content every time you've watched a small video. And there is so much content, heritage content that has been digitized and that exists today. And one of the big questions is, what do we do with it? So on the one hand, how do we transmit it, which means where do we make it accessible? And how do we turn it into experiences? But just sticking to the AI question, what AIs can help with is to curate, like a museum curator, an experience of this wealth of digitized heritage that's existing already. So we can train algorithms or AIs to become your own personal recommendation tools to help you navigate the jungle of all this digitized content.
I need to react to you on behalf of some people who are probably going to react, but they will not be allowed because they are watching this not live. I mean, you're replacing curators by algorithms. I understand your point. That's the whole point of this conversation. But, I mean, do you really think that algorithms are going to replace curatorship in the digital museum as we believe? I mean, is the future of digital museums or the future of museums to have algorithms in terms of curators? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think so. But I think if I was a curator working at a museum or at an institution, and I had 50 kids visit me who were 15-year-old, I could have a program profile them for me, and then suggest 3 different programs that I could take them through. Very quickly, very automatically, based on their age, their gender, where they come from, their interests, what they've been doing on Facebook for the past week, and then I could make a really super interesting, 1-hour experience about the Second World War, or about the human body, or whatever I need to communicate, and I could have an AI assist me in that curatorship, not replace me.
No, Xenophon, no disrespect to you, but you have experience. You have life experience and professional experience, meaning you were among the first, definitely from everybody in this panel here, among the first who started working many years ago, almost in the prehistory of digitization, into these topics, When nobody was working digitization, Xenophon Zabulis was already there, You were among the first who went to the moon, to this particular moon. So you have a perspective that none of us has. Because you've seen, and you've mentioned that in other conversations we've had, you've seen that you used to visit organizations and you were the digital guy, they looked to you as a kind of NASA expert, you knew things that nobody knew, you had machines that nobody knew, and now when you go to places, people have in their iPhones part of the capabilities you used to bring to them, and they have it in video games and so on. So you've seen this evolution from being a kind of pioneer into uncharted territories, into going to places where people now have their iPhones, they have everything, and they know as much as you knew 20 years ago. So you're in a perfect position to say, where are we heading? Where are we going in 20 years from now?
I don't know what I can tell so much in the past, but the thing is that the pandemic gave us many examples of how important human communication is and how difficult it is to replace. So I think that it's a time to reconsider a lot of things that we took for granted. And technology can help us, but it cannot replace everything. And I think the technology, and at least my interests are starting to shift toward this direction, is to better understand the computer, the mind. So the more we understand, and science is not, we do not demystify. By understanding better something, you see more of its beauty. So I think that, and it's going on. If you see science, brain research and cognitive research are emerging topics. Artificial intelligence, I don't know if it's intelligence yet, but is striving and is going to. There's some people say even that dreams are training of various situations of the mind, now that we understand how artificial intelligence works, or at least these learning methods. So I think that the exploration of how we work will make us richer.
Okay, so building on the human dimension, which I would bring this back to you, Geraldine. You know, the report of ICOM is the International Organization for Museums, produced a very interesting report about the situation of museums, and they do represent museums, and the digitization. What are the challenges and what are they hitting? And so ICOM, with the legitimacy it has, absolutely underlined that what we're talking about here is essential for them. It's essential for the museum's survival. Now, ICOM doesn't say how that needs to be done. So you're listening here, you know of algorithm as a curator. I'm provoking a little bit. You are in touch with a lot of museums and heritage organizations. You have this direct knowledge. How prepared you think they are? Where do you think are we going? Also, on the dimension you said about the entering of the private actors here. So what is your perspective of how it is heading to?
There is a big gap between different museums. We have museums with digital department and other with a director who open the door and make all the communication files and all stuff because she's only employee. So the reality is not the same for all museums. Is the first fact. And also they need some concrete action. They don't have time and money to make the R&D. So they want to operate. And perhaps the big challenge is to help them to change their relationship because they're so comfortable to manage all stuff that it's difficult to help them to change, to say perhaps you can use your place to host external experience to help some producer to broadcast their production and not manage the story, just some exchange, but they feel, okay, perhaps I will less control of the content, and I will not be useful for my visitor. So it's a big challenge of what is the role and the future of the team and how they work with the surrounding and the citizen. Because the museum also knows there is sustainable challenge, and perhaps the museum is the bridge between education, public space, and identities. And the idea of identity is a big challenge because we know that all our new generation are more linked with communities, virtual communities, perhaps not national communities. So the reflection inside museum is about this, to say, okay, how can we share a common stories? How can we use the object of the past to build something together? So I think their point is there.
Raphaël, you're an expert. You're a technological expert here, and you say that with a lot of pride. So you are not a cultural heritage expert, you're an expert in technology, and you've been applying that to this project that we are today summarizing. And among other things, you're a strong expert in motion capture and everything that relates to that. And you've been applying that to museums and to cultural heritage organizations. Now, this is an example of technology reaching the museums, but you've been working on motion capture in other areas as well. So here's the question. If we're talking about exploitation and about how museums interact now with technology in other ways, do you think that the digitization of museums through motion capture, through augmented reality, the question can be followed up by you as well, puts museums in contact with new players, with people in the ecosystem? You know, there are new actors that the museums had never spoken to. But now, because they are armed, if I can put that way, with new digital tools, they can be players in another way. And that can eventually mean that they could put the content at the disposal of other products, of other activities. I mean, how do you see this interaction of museums as technological players in an environment that was not theirs? Is it open new opportunities? Does this open new opportunities for museums?
But by other players, you mean new publics?
No, publics, technological partners, investors, people who might decide to make new usage of content and museums that was kind of precluded within the walls of a museum, but through digitization, AR, VR, motion capture, it suddenly has new possibilities which can contribute to its funding. Definitely they are in another ecosystem.
Sure, so the heritage that's inside the museums now, with every new technology, becomes accessible in a different way.
Exactly. That's can you develop that? That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
In some way, like a mineral deposit can be exploited with new technologies.
Yeah.
That's interesting. To be fair, I'm not an expert on this question at all.
But you phrased it perfectly. A mineral deposit and new uses for those minerals. So exactly what I'm trying to say. You said it perfectly.
What I've seen is there's new possibilities for commercial exploitation, among others, and for this there's a need for new partners also, as we have all seen. So we have the museums already have a lot of skills and work with different subsidiaries. And I think it's one of the things that also were taught by Anna and her team. So that are the challenges. But I think it's not completely new. I think it's just the continuation of what was before. Regarding AI, in particular, I think there's a specific question to this, because it's really it's sensitive in terms of ethics. It's highly specialized. It's highly costly. We have AI now can create interesting pieces of art. So that's a question. Do we need to create a museum that hosts these new pieces of art? At the same time, it's really it's not cost effective in terms of machine expenditure, so it has to be used wisely. But yeah, regarding your question, it opens up to a lot of new players. I don't know if the museums really compete with other companies that exploited the heritage before. I don't know about that.
Matias, do you want to step in on this? Exploit new ways of exploitation, which of course it's a word that is horrible for any curator of cultural heritage, because somebody who is in charge of a museum is not there to exploit anything. He's taking care of he's having a mission. Every museum has a mission. It's taking care of heritage. But okay, we're using this word here in terms of obtaining new resources and having a possibility of the investment that is behind digitization, reaching new audiences, new public, and eventually new sources of revenue. So from this angle.
So I love the mineral deposit way of conceptualizing it. So let's say that there's a lot of mineral deposits out there of digitized cultural heritage. And then the question is, what do we do with it that can benefit us as a museum, as an institution? And I know of a very interesting example where the Danish National Art Gallery has 300,000 digitized assets. And now the question is, what do we do with these assets other than just making them available? And one thing that they've done, among many things, which I think is beautiful and points towards these partnerships, is to partner up with an organization called Ventilen, which is an NGO made for youngsters who feel lonely in their lives. And they've made their digitized assets available for this NGO. And then what the NGO does is that they bring these youngsters together, and then the youngsters pick various assets, and then they use different types of narrative methods to identify themselves with these different statues, with these different paintings, in order to tell a story about themselves and their lives. And that's been proven to benefit them, because they suffer from loneliness and often anxiety, different comorbidities. But I think this example of a national art gallery collaborating with an NGO to benefit youngsters, and by doing that, alleviating, an illness or something that they suffer from, that has societal impact and societal value. And if you made such a partnership, then you could ask the state for money to drive these processes, right? And that's just one way of partnering up and generating activity, generating revenue, if you want to call it that. But it's all about activity and the right partnerships.
Now, Anna, as a part of the Digi Training project, you've been looking a little bit into the business models behind museums and the management. Now, again, terminology is tricky here. Many museums don't have actually a business model, but let's call them revenue models, which might be more comfortable for many museums and more accurate, In any case, yes, any museum that is worth its name and worth of having some decent management needs to have a revenue model, because even if there's public subsidy, they do need a revenue model. Now, how do you see this digitization and this transition into as a change of, is it just a change of model, or is it just something that brings a new line of revenue together with the previous one, or is it actually a revolution that turns upside down the whole revenue model? How do you see this?
Well, I saw also in contact with some museums that even those who are largely publicly funded, more and more they feel this pressure. So with time, it will be, I don't know, almost impossible to have this kind of public funding that is able to cover all the activities. Then there is this question that we were also talking about previously, which is the concern that the museums have that they need to provide, or they should have this social mission, and they should make culture available for free for the public. And this is all true. But digitization can bring new forms of revenue, and I have to insist again in the part of collaboration and partnering, and this can also give access to funding. And this, for example, in our case may be normal, because we are used to build partnerships and we are used to rely on others. I don't know exactly the technicalities of what you did, but I trust that you are doing your part. And this is a way that can be also a transformation of the business model of the museums, that they incorporate also this source of revenue or receipts through access to public funding and through access to resources and expertise that they don't necessarily subcontract. They can partner with others. So I thought, I found the idea that Geraldine shared very interesting, that a museum could, for example, use part of their space to host another exhibition. And sometimes we just don't think about these possibilities. In other cases, we we don't trust enough because we are not used to rely totally on others. But this is something that digitization can bring in different ways, because collaboration is easier, sharing of information is easier, working together at distance is easier, and also getting funding is easier. Connecting to what Matias was saying, if you partner with an NGO, for example, it will become much easier for you to do a crowdfunding campaign, for example, for the community support a certain initiative, and then to contribute more for the museum to continue this type of activities. So there are different ways.
A magic word here would be collaboration. I would return. We are closing up now progressively. We're reaching the end of this conversation. So, Geraldine, collaboration, networking, which is not the same meaning. Does digitization push for networking? Does it open new possibilities there in a very substantial way? How would you see that angle?
I think it's a need. We have no choice. We have just to find the best way to collaborate, because, for example, my project is called XR for Heritage. So to start, it's XR world will meet another worlds. And in the collaboration, we see that the operating business model needs the touristic field, the technological field, with all the IT, the content creator. It's a lot of people. So we have to build this new sector to organize the revenues and the exploitation and the rights, the in situ and online, all the structural requirement foundation to go further. Because at this stage, the frustration is the lack of impact. A lot of people are thinking about good stories, and they make months and months to build this, and after they don't have broadcast vision. So perhaps there is 10 people who watch it, like you say, okay, it's great, but it's not scale up. We need to scale up.
A quick comment on that. I mean, a way to do this, and I think what's really important as a museum, if you want to make use of these technologies, AR, VR, AR, and so on, is to think about the metaverse, and to think about a metaverse architecture that's relevant for you. So imagine if you have 50 museums that are all working with birds, then of course they should make a metaverse architecture around birds, where you can either try flying as a bird, or rotate and observe a bird up close, or dissect a bird, or make a bird explode, or whatever you want to do with a bird. And then, of course, you need to gain access to this metaverse architecture that you own together with the 49 other bird museums across the world who have this as a topic. And that's a way to start constructing these partnerships and draw lines between institutions, I think.
Well, as always, when we have conversation about the future, it's time. So this is being recorded, will stay there, and somebody in 20, 25 years will pick up this video conversation, and we'll see you talking about the metaverse, and we will see what happened and where we are and how they see each other. So with this, we close this panel, and I would like now to give the floor for very closing remarks, not only of this panel of ours, but of this whole event that has been the closing of the Digi Training project. Stephanie Thomas.
Excellent panel. Thank you. We thank you, our audience, for joining us for Digi Training's final showcase. Although it was not without technical glitch, we delved into the inner processes of cultural heritage institutions across Europe, many coping with the challenges of shifts in the digital environment. We reflected on the capacity building processes at the heart of Digi Training's mission and looked towards a stronger future. Digi Training is an EU co-funded project led by Forth, based in Greece, and including partners Inova, Khora, C-Factor, Armines, and CUMEDIAE. On behalf of the consortium, it is a pleasure to bring today's session to a close. We will process this video, as explained just now, for circulation in relevant networks and encourage you to share this widely so that we can continue the conversation, a very important one and one that will evolve for years to come. We look forward to engaging with you in the future in various projects and dispensations. So thank you and have a wonderful rest of your evening.